Case number one then. So creating large DWF files in Inventor is a challenge. We've seen already that we can automate through the CAD add-in the creation of DWF files for Inventor, and we might want those DWF files so that others in the organization who don't have CAD products can visualize the 3D models that we're working with. So how we've solved this problem with Sovelia Vault, Sovelia Integrator, if you're not aware of it, and also with Navisworks. So let's look at what the problem is to start with, and then from there we can work out how we've solved it. So in this case, then the problem is this. If you have Inventor 2016, which none of you by now, I should hope, do. You've all moved on to a later version of the product than that. We were able to make DWFs just fine with Inventor 2016. However, if we go beyond that, then the times to produce the DWFs are becoming slower and slower. So newer products, larger numbers, the time to produce the DWFs is becoming, a problem. So this is nothing we can control. It's not something in Symetri's remit to be able to control. This is all based around Autodesk technology. And here we look at an example. So we've got a first level assembly. Symetri have done some work around this and some studies into this with data from one of our customers. So here we have an assembly which is just over 2,000 parts of individual parts, but put together there's nearly 23,000 of those all in one assembly. And if we try and make a DWF now of that, it takes 1 minute 20 to produce the DWF. So that's potentially the time that you're sitting there as a CAD person waiting for the DWF to appear. It then will save that DWF and we can then use that in Sovelia PLM as the viewing tool, or that you might want to use this in other methods. So 1 minute 20 for that assembly. Now, I don't know from a customer point of view whether your assemblies are that big, whether they're as big as that, whether they're smaller. If they're smaller assemblies, then you might not have a problem. Up to about 1,000 parts. If we look more towards the right there, it's not that long to make a DWF file. But certainly I know that some of our customers have large models and larger models than that. And we can see that example here on the left-hand side. If we jump then from 2,000 parts up to 5,000 individual parts in an assembly, and then we're using those parts and we've got copies of them or we've arrayed them, and that takes us up to 53,500 of those parts, then we can't actually make the DWF file anymore. It was working for 3 minutes 40 here to try and make the DWF, and then it crashed out or something happened. Even then, trying the DWF in memory saving mode, it still got to 2.5 minutes to produce it, but it was corrupt. Moving forward then, when we looked at this from an Autodesk point of view, Autodesk's preferred method of creating DWFs is to use Navisworks Manage as the tool. So you load the Inventor file and model into Navisworks, but that takes nearly 9 minutes. It's nearly 3 times longer to load the model into that compared to having it in Inventor. But then it did only take 50 seconds to make that DWF file once it was produced. Now, there's a load of questions and problems and issues that I can see around there. So first of all, we can't do it in Inventor. We can't do it as part of our traditional workflow. We could use Navisworks, but Navisworks is then not an automatic process, it's a manual process. And then we get a DWF file that isn't in Inventor, it's in another format. And what can we do with that? So to summarize then, 2018 version of Inventor that we tried this on is no good to support the DWF workflow in moving forward. And we should be using Navisworks to create those larger DWFs of assemblies. So that's the problem summarized really there. So let's look at how we overcame this problem and how we managed to provide a solution. And then we can take some stock from that and have a look at how that might help you, or the techniques that we've used in order to solve the problem, how it might help you in your day-to-day work or solving your day-to-day problems. So the solution then. This took a little bit of working out, and we tried a few things, but I thought rather than giving you the various things that didn't work, we cut straight to the way that did work. So we know that in 2018, with our Inventor files, we can't produce DWF, so we can't produce those large DWF, those files from large assemblies. They fail or they take a long time, which is unacceptable for the workflow that we want moving forward. But we know then that we should be using Navisworks Manage as the tool. And if you have industry collections or some kind of collection from Autodesk, which again, most of our customers do, you get a copy of Navisworks as part of that portfolio from Autodesk. You also get some form of Vault. In this case, we're looking at Vault Workgroup or Vault Professional, because we want to put the data into Vault Workgroup or Vault Professional. And then we know then that we go through some life cycles. And we saw that Marco this morning, we can automate the way that those life cycles happen through the use of the CAD add-in, or we could automate them through the use of the doing it in the HTML interface. But at some point, we're going to get to a point where we're happy with the design. That might be at the design ready stage. It might be at the in production stage. But once we get to that design ready stage, that's the trigger that Sovelia Vault needs. So Sovelia Vault, which was talked about in the last session that Bjorn did, Sovelia Vault then is very good at picking up a change in the workflow or a change that we've picked. In this case, it's a change in state. That change in state will now kick off a series of actions within Sovelia Vault. The first thing that will happen then is that it will take the assembly that we have put into design ready, and we were able to, as Bjorn says, we've now managed to generate and create some scripts that will look at the assembly, take the assembly information, and it will then be able to open up Navisworks and put Navisworks, put the Inventor model or the Inventor assembly into Navisworks. And it'll do this all automatically without us having to do anything. Now we're using the job processor to do this. So for instance, we could in Inventor move on and we could be working on other things. And this really gets around the idea that we're going to wait 8 or 9 minutes for this to open up in Navisworks. So this is basically happening in the background somewhere else. We don't actually need to think about this. The computers are going to go and do this for us. So by using one of our Sovelia products, Sovelia Vault, we can start to automate that process of getting the data when it's state changed into Naviate and open it up. We then produce a DWF file from Naviate, and we saw from our problems and our findings that it's very quick to do that. One thing to note at this point is that we have already in Inventor itemized the model that we wanted, and we saw earlier how easy that was, that Marco showed us how easy it was to automate that process of creating the items and also assigning a revision to the model in Inventor. So we're now going to have a DWF file, and we can save that DWF file away now with an item and a revision. And with that item and revision information, we would put that onto a folder inside our environment, inside our CAD environment, inside our server environment, or we would denote a folder where we would add that onto the system. And all of those tasks there are controlled by Sovelia Vault in order to do that. So it's a tool for having these jobs, having them automatically, and producing a workflow to get to a point. It's at this point then that we now have a newly created DWF file in a folder. That DWF file is unconnected to Sovelia PLM, and it is also unconnected to the item that we generated back in Inventor as part of Marco's workflow of generating those items automatically. So the next stage is that we need to get that DWF file in as one of the attachments, so that, as Sammy showed earlier on today, we get the paperclip then showing us the DWF file that's linked to the assembly inside the PLM, inside the HTML system. And the way that we do that is through a new tool. Lots of you have already made inquiries about this, and I think we're starting to implement this in lots of our customers. But we have a new tool here called Sovelia Integration. And Sovelia Integration is a service that sits on the same server as the PLM server. And in this case, it's going to watch the folder and monitor the folder. And when it finds the DWF file inside the folder, a new DWF file that's been created, it will add, it'll run some scripts on that, and it'll do some checking to find out what kind of file it is and how it exists and where it should be placed, and does it have the right information to place it in the right place. And if it does, and if it meets those criteria, then it will add that to Sovelia PLM, and it will then automate the task of it going into the right place, creating an object for it if we need to, and then attaching that object to the item if we need to. So, a task that was quite simple before. We just used to publish our DWF files and they would automatically go straight into our PLM system as part of the workflows that we've had. We've now had to add in some extra steps in order to do that, and we've now used some of the tools inside the system to be able to do that. If we just take a look at that in a little bit more depth, then we've said here that in our watched folder, a new file arrives. That file is a DWF file. It has our item and it has our revision. And at that point, as we've said, Sovelia Integration it's a service that sits on the server and it's working all the time. And in the background, it's just looking at that folder and looking for new files. Once a new file appears in the folder, then it will grab its part name or its part number or its item and revision and DWF information, and it will then do some things. As part of integration, then we have a configuration. That configuration in this case is telling us which server to go and look at, might contain some password information. Maybe we're going out to the cloud. It might give us some cloud information, but really some configuration as to where to go and find a file in this case. And then we have some standard scripts. So this is quite a new product. We've been working away here. We probably have 50% of the standard scripts that we need to automate a lot of the processes that our customers are wanting to do. That said, though, we may actually need some custom scripts. And in this case, this was a custom script that we needed to create in order to handle this DWF file and be able to do some checking on it before we actually go into PLM. And this is roughly the checking that custom script has done. So we take our file and we apply some logic to it. The logic is that we know that it has an item. And the first thing that we do is check in Sovelia PLM to see whether that has an item. If there's an item associated to it, if there isn't an item associated to it, then we know we're okay to create the item, and then we're also okay to create the DWF file and associate it to that item. But if the item exists already, then things get a little bit more tricky. Then we need to look at the revision behind the item, and if it has a revision, we need to check the revision. If it's the same revision or a newer revision, then we're okay to take this file and replace the information that's there already with this newer updated file, and then put that into PLM. But maybe this is too newer information, or maybe this is older information or older revisions than we currently have in the system, in which case we want to reject that file because it's not as up to date as the information in the system. And so the integrator is working on scripts, and we can customize those scripts. As I've said, in this case, it's a custom script just to get that in. So two things at play there in that solution. One, we're using Sovelia Vault to maximize our workflows within inside the Autodesk portfolio, but also we are then working on the data and working on information in the integration to get that into PLM. And it doesn't matter whether you've got an Autodesk product, or maybe you have another product. Maybe there's a custom file that you want to attach into Sovelia PLM to one of your items, or maybe there's a different CAD system and you want to get the visualization file for that into the system. Might not be a DWF file, but we have the technology and the capability now to be able to grab information that is produced and automate its route into Sovelia PLM and attach it into the right place. So really good customer case there. We've solved it for the customer, that everything is now automated. They're now getting the DWF files into the system in the right place without having to go through any of the manual steps in creating any of the Navisworks files, opening it up, loading the Inventor stuff, creating the DWF, checking it in automatically. So user-wise there, we're saving a heck of a lot of time for every large DWF that needs to be